Swayam Prabha. Digital India. Educated India.
Welcome to session on Research and Publication Ethics. My name is Dr. Nirbhay Kumar Mishra. I am an assistant professor at Institute of Applied Sciences and Humanities at GL University, Mathura. Today, I will be discussing lecture number 2, which is on philosophy in research. We'll talk about definition, its nature, scope, and branches of philosophy. So, what the scholars will learn after this session, they will understand the value of philosophy in knowledge and research development. They will come to know about the branches of philosophy and how they have a role in research shaping. They also understand the nature and scope of philosophy in different ages from ancient to modern times, and in the end, they will try to understand the role of logic, language, and empiricism in shaping scientific philosophical attitude and the philosophy of science. So, when we talk about philosophy, we have to understand there are several questions which comes in our mind, like what is philosophy? What are the branches of philosophy? What is the nature of philosophy? What is the philosophical attitude in research? So, I will be trying to answer these questions to the understanding of philosophy. So, when we talk about what is philosophy, so what philosophers do, a love of knowledge, a love of wisdom. So, philosophy springs from the word philosophia. Philo means love, and Sophia means knowledge. And we always hear this quote, philosophy is the mother of all sciences. So we understand that philosophy actually forms a basis for all kinds of knowledges. So the fundamental principles of reality and knowledge we explore and we analyze through philosophical discussions. So now, we will try to understand about the branches of philosophy. We talk about logic, metaphysics, epistemology, and axiology. So, first we'll talk about what is logic. So, logic is study of arguments. They can be valid or invalid. If they follow the correct rules of logic, they are valid. If they don't follow the rules and commit fallacies, they are invalid arguments. So, of course, when we talk about the arguments, we must understand they are composed of statements, and we have to understand all statements are sentences, but not the vice versa. All sentences are not these statements. So, statements has a property, what we call in logic preposition. A preposition is a sentence which is either true or false. So, truth and falsity is the property of a statement, and validity and invalidity is property of an argument. So, we have to understand when we write thesis or when we produce research papers, we go through the arguments of different scholars. We need to understand what kind of arguments those are, whether they are generating some conclusion through valid discussions. So, logic plays an important role in research and development. So, all scholars must have a general understanding of logic. So, we have to understand what is sound argument and what is valid argument. So, sound argument is the argument which is not only valid, but corresponds to the reality, while the valid argument may not be corresponding to reality, but following the right rules of logic. So we also give emphasis in the logic on the language, whether the language is right with the logical rules or language committing with certain fallacies. We also focus on the meaning and ambiguity in the logic. So we understand in the logic about the principle of reasonings, we understand about deductive and inductive logic, and we talk about certainty and probability. I'm giving you a general, introduction on this logic. So deductive reasoning, where you have a complete data, like all men are mortal, Ram is a man, Ram is immortal. So this is deductive argument because we have a universal premise and we are deducing from a complete data set. So of course we can certainly conclude something. And while in the probability we talk about the inductive reasoning, when we don't have the complete data, and out of the incomplete data we try to generalize our conclusions. So when we don't have the complete data, we talk about the probability. Of course we can increase probability if we increase the sample size. Now let's move to the understanding of metaphysics. So metaphysics, we have to understand Aristotle wrote two books, Physics and Metaphysics. So after physics he wrote metaphysics, and metaphysics is about the theory of existence. It's about the nature of reality. We try to understand about the God, soul and world, what kind of what kind of entities they are, how we understand them, how the existence, what is about their nature of existence. We also talk about the space and time, how things exist in space and time, what is beyond space and time, how we configure them in the space and time, and we talk about the entities, objects and their properties. And further in the metaphysics we also talk about the mind and body and their relations. We talk about the consciousness, and we talk about how the things are consisting of whole and parts, or the things really only composition of their parts, or they have a different existence beyond the whole. And then of course we have a discussion in meteorology and non-meteorology. We talk about the evolution in the metaphysics, about the nature of existence. Then we talk about the theory of causation, how things are caused in nature, and what is the prior cause, what is the existing cause, what is the formal cause, what is the efficient cause, and what is the final cause. And then of course we understand what is an event, and we try to configure the event in terms of the causation theory. And then of course there are two major branches in the discourse on metaphysics. They are philosophy of mind and philosophy of religion. Now we'll talk about epistemology. So the main question in this branch of philosophy is about knowledge. How do we know? And the nature and theory of knowledge. Is knowledge possible? If it is possible, in what ways knowledge is possible? What are the right sources of knowledge, or valid sources of knowledge, and what is the illusion? And then we have to understand back in the history when Socrates talks about knowledge is virtue, which has to be practiced in real life, right? And Plato talks about true justified belief. He talks about knowledge is a belief which actually reaches a certain level of clarity from belief to opinion, and from opinion to thinking, and then it turns to a knowledge which has a characteristics of truth and justification. And then in the modern ages, A.J. Ayer explains the knowledge as right to be sure. And then we move to the understanding of axiology. Axiology is a theory of value, where we talk about what is value of an entity. And in that discussion of axiology, we talk about ethics. So ethics, of course, study of what is right and wrong, what is good and bad, what ought or what ought not to be done. And then we talk about the moral judgments, what are the right thing to do in the life, what is the ethical decision making process, that we will discuss in the discussion on ethics. So another branch which is in the axiology, that is aesthetics. In the aesthetics, we talk about the idea of art and beauty, how this universe is constituted, and we talk about the message and meaning behind the beauty, paintings, and all kinds of natural creation and creativity. In that discussion, we also talk about social and political philosophy, because there is discussion of value in these two subjects also that are concerned with the justice and fairness in social, political, and economic institutions. After discussing branches of philosophy, let us move to understand what is philosophy. So, of course, when we talk about the philosophy, we start with the discussion of Plato, because we find the written resources in the Plato's discussion, and he talks about the theory of forms. That's very interesting, and that's what we can call first organized theory on knowledge in Western philosophy in most ancient times. So when Plato talks about the theory of forms, what he has in mind here, he talks about the theory of ideas. He talks about two kinds of words, right? Visible world and intelligible words. So according to him, the knowledge that is in the visible world, that word is changeable word, where we don't have the permanent things. We cannot rely. There's no certainty in this visible world. So of course we start developing our knowledge from the belief. We have different beliefs to practice in the world, and then beliefs, from the beliefs we develop opinions. So these two characteristics of human knowledge practice in this world are consisting of belief and opinion that belong to a visible world, and there is intelligible world where our opinion actually that's degrees of knowledge Plato talks about, and he says on the third level we reach thinking. Thinking is upper level to the opinion, and after thinking, and we have a true justifications, what he calls true justified beliefs. So when beliefs turns to be truth and we have justification in terms of reasons, and our thinking is very clear, then we reach the level of knowledge. So he talks about two kinds of word: visible word, where ideas belong to the transcendental world. That's what he calls intelligible world. So ideas are the archetypes of knowledge, where we can say the phototypes are the practices we actually carry on this world in terms of what we can call the knowledge practices. So Plato of course talks about theory of ideas. Interestingly, it involves two kinds of word, visible and intelligible. So it also involves degree of knowledge. It starts from the belief and ends in the knowledge. So after discussing the Platonic idea of knowledge and theory of knowledge, we try to understand the philosophy, how it has developed in the course of time through the nature of philosophy. So in the ancient times, when people call philosophy begins in wonder, actually that's where philosophers was actually trying to discover about the reality, how this nature is formed. They were trying to understand the major forces which constituted the reality. They came up with the water, fire, and the other sources which are ultimately real. There we find the theories which are based on the change, or which are based on the idea of permanency. So the ancient philosophy, most ancient philosophy, the philosophers were enjoying the wonders in discovering the facts about the nature, the facts about their own self. So that's why we call philosophy begins in wonder in ancient times. When then it moves to medieval ages, when we call philosophy begins in faith, because we see that philosophy was under the clutch of popes and churches, and philosophers were did not have freedom to explain the realities the way they wanted. They had to adhere with the rules of religion. So religion was dominating the philosophy in the Middle Ages. So when we move from Middle Age to the modern age, we find a great development after a Renaissance. What we observe, the rise of science, the inventions, discoveries, and the travelers, great travelers, explored different cultures and different countries. And then we see the change in philosophy from the modern philosophers. The father of modern philosophy, René Descartes, who came up with a philosophical method, what he calls method of doubt. So we see after Renaissance, we see the change in philosophy. Now philosophy begins in doubt, and Descartes maintains that don't accept anything until it clarifies itself. And everywhere when you are endeavoring for knowledge, you have to start with doubt. Let's talk about the Aristotle after Plato, right? When philosophy starts in wonder, you find this quotation in Aristotle's text, Metaphysics, right? And the metaphysics is about the causation evaluation. So philosophy of science is to know how the world and the things around are actually caused, evolved, and exist. What is the purpose? What is the purpose they strive to achieve? After discussing the nature of philosophy, let's move to understand in what ways Aristotle defines about the philosophy. So philosophy starts in wonder. We find this quote in Aristotelian text Metaphysics. So he talks about metaphysics, causation, and evolution. So philosophy of science is to know how the world and the things around are actually caused, evolve, and exist. So what is the purpose they strive to achieve, the philosopher they strive to achieve? So we try to understand in Aristotelian discussion, he talks about the causation, and his theory of causation is really very wide theory, because it starts with the formal cause, then he talks about the material cause, efficient cause, and the final cause. And one of the interesting concepts that we find, and that's a very interesting concept even for the research scholars also, to understand what is teleology and what is teleopathy. So Aristotle talks about the purpose in this universe, and every entity in this universe is at certain level is trying to achieve that purpose, and that is what he calls entelechy. That is the perfect state of achievement every entity is trying to achieve. So in his discussion of teleology, he says that teleology is to understand the purpose of anything. So when you understand the purpose of a thing in question rightly, or you use the right means to achieve that purpose, that's the teleology. While when either you misunderstand the purpose in question, or you use the wrong means to achieve the purpose, you commit teleopathy. So of course we have to understand as a researcher what is the purpose of research. That is to produce quality research, and that is to develop good researchers, maintain research integrity, where we have to understand the right purpose, and of course we have to use the right means, and we should not commit teleopathy by using wrong means or committing plagiarism. Now further, we talk about a great rationalist philosopher who is known as a father of modern philosophy, René Descartes. So rationalism, of course, is a school in philosophy which talks about that knowledge is possible through the reasons, and mind alone is capable to achieve the knowledge with certainty, while they maintain that the sense experience is fallible, because there's change in the nature, in the world, and our senses they mislead us. So the certain knowledge is not possible by the sense experience. It is possible through the faculties of mind, and there are innate ideas through which we can achieve certain knowledge. So let's talk about René Descartes. Okay, so in his book Discourse on Method, he talks about the method of doubt, and that's really very important. As a researcher, you must understand that when you start writing your paper or your thesis, you should not be biased or accept any theory, any research point. You must have critical arguments on that theory, on the tradition, on the school, so that you can evolve with a true researcher with a critical thinking. And that's where really René Descartes' philosophy plays an important role in shaping research philosophy. So uh, Rene Descartes establishes the fact through the doubt, and he starts doubting each and everything. In the end, he finds what can be established as a certain fact, what he calls the self, and he says that I think, therefore I am. That means thinking is the faculty of mind. Even if I deny this thinking, I actually prove the thinker, and the thinker as a self is certain fact that I can establish in the form of knowledge. So Descartes actually established a trend in philosophy, that is a philosophy starts in doubt and the method of doubt. So after Rene Descartes, we move to understand a different school of philosophy, which is empiricism. Empiricism contradicts rationalists on this point that knowledge is possible only through some innate ideas of mind, or mind alone can produce certain knowledge. Empiricist school, they talk about the idea, but the notion of idea is based on the sense experience. That's different from the idea of the rationalist scholars. And now we'll talk about the great philosopher David Hume, because David Hume actually he turns to a devil advocate in philosophy, and he says that knowledge is impossible the way rationalists have defined, or even empiricists have defined so far. David Hume finds that causality does not occur in reality. It is a mental construction due to the repeated and constant conjunction between the events we call cause and that we call effect. So what David Hume tries to say, that the knowledge we claim in the reality is is not based on any substance or the cause and effect, which is defined source of event in the form of knowledge. It is not based on a permanent relation. It is simply based on the probability of the events, or it is a continuation of the events of nature that we observe. So psychologically, we develop this habit to understand one event as cause and the other event as effect, and we establish this permanent relation to form the knowledge. So he casts severe doubt, and he turns to be universal skeptic. David Hume turns, and then Hume actually he says that the certain knowledge is possible in mathematics, right, and it's not possible for the sensory world, and then he says that he does not propose to abandon induction, but to give up the goal of achieving certain necessary knowledge in the real world. So of course David Hume casted the severe doubt, and he changed the trends of philosophy and the research development further. After David Hume, we find one good effort by a great German philosopher, Immanuel Kant. In his critique of pure reason, he actually criticized the metaphysical account of rationalists, where they maintain that the reason alone can establish the certain knowledge. He criticized that all the knowledge begins in experience but ends in reason. So he gives importance to sensory experiences, where from our knowledge starts, and it then turns in the shape of knowledge by using the faculties of mind, what he calls categories of mind. So he made an effort to reconcile the two diametrically opposite trends, knowledge trends we can say in philosophy, namely rationalism and empiricism. So in his famous quote, he says, all our knowledge begins with the senses, proceeds then to the understanding, and ends with reason. There is nothing higher than reason. So of course we understand how to reconcile these two opposite trends of knowledge, and in bringing this reconciliation, he points out the fact that the knowledge is composition of both your sensory experiences and faculties of mind. Thereafter, we talk about a great German philosopher, Georg Wilhelm Friedrich Hegel. Hegel developed interesting method, that is dialectical logic, in his encyclopedia logic. So he says that truth is found neither in the thesis nor the antithesis, but in an emergent synthesis which reconciles the two. So he says that knowledge is kind of continuum which starts with a thesis. When we see a kind of idea that comes in nature produced by someone, and then we see the contradictions, the criticism of those ideas, and then both thesis and antithesis, they settle with the synthesis, and synthesis is the emergent form of knowledge what Hegel talks about. So Hegel says that's not only 12 categories through which we can shape our knowledge, what Immanuel Kant talked about. He says that there can be a number of categories, number of ways we can create the knowledge, but it has a dialectical logic. It follows from thesis, antithesis, and synthesis of the knowledge. And then we moved to a different trend in philosophy, and here we'll talk about three great Cambridge scholars, G. E. Moore, Burton, Russell, and Wittgenstein. Right. So Moore, he adapts a different attitude in philosophy, criticizing the rationalist and the empiricist arguments on the knowledge. He talks about we have a different source of establishing the facts, what he calls common sense philosophy. So he propounds a kind of realism which is based on our common sense experiences, and we can establish fact by the common sense experiences. So of course he led the trend of analytic philosophy, and he argued for pluralism and realism when those things were not true. So we have to understand he argued for a common sense philosophy, established the point that there are facts which doesn't require any what's tight argument. Only our common sense experience can establish those facts, and we can understand and we can know certainly. Now we come to a great philosopher, Bertrand Russell. He wrote a history of Western philosophy, and in his famous quote, what he talked about, all definite knowledge, so I should contend, belongs to science. All dogma as to what surpasses definite knowledge belongs to theology. But between theology and science, there is a no man's land. Exposed to attack from both sides, this no man's land is philosophy. That's really complex quotation, but there is clarity that Bertrand Russell talks about a revisionary metaphysics in philosophy. He says that the ordinary language is not capable of giving us certain facts or certain knowledge. What physics does, or what we find in mathematics, if we want certain knowledge free of ambiguity, we need to restructure the language. There he talks about the revisionary metaphysics we need to develop to establish the certain facts in philosophy. So he talks about that theology and which is written, or the metaphysics which is written in philosophy, is not about the definite certain facts or certain knowledge, or what we can say there is a lot of ambiguity, and that not falls in the realm of the facts we can actually prove or disapprove. And there he talks about that through the philosophy we understand both that where philosophy actually means to certain facts or certain knowledge, and where it does not. So of course theology does not fall into that kind of certain discourse and knowledge, and where we can talk about the sciences, or we can talk about physics and mathematics. So after Bertrand Russell, we move to the great Australian British philosophers, Ludwig Wittgenstein. So Wittgenstein interestingly develops a very different way of understanding philosophy, which actually involves logic, language, and science. He has been a great logician, and a philosopher in language, philosophy of language. And then Wittgenstein defines philosophy as a therapeutic activity. He maintains this point that fact generation is not the job of philosophy. So philosophy cannot establish any fact. This only science can do. So what philosophy can actually do? Then Wittgenstein explains, philosophy, the role of philosophy is therapeutic. It resolves the problem coming in the fact generation. So he talks about the logical form. So what philosophy best can offer through the logic, it can actually check and balance the fact, whether those facts are rightly structured or not, whether they correspond to the reality or not. And that's where philosophy, by the logic or the logical form, what he calls, can establish certain facts and can actually clarify the facts. So of course he talks about the sensical and nonsensical and senseless prepositions. So what is sensical according to Wittgenstein? That falls within the space and time where we can understand, the reality or the things in nature in terms of the facts we can sense, experience, and those facts we can actually prove or disapprove. For example, a cat is on mat. That is sensical propositions, because we can prove or disapprove this proposition by our sense experience, by looking at the cat and the mat and the position. While when we say that senseless propositions, so when we talk about the tautology, that a cat is cat, so it's not adding any information to our knowledge. It's simply tautology. And or we say a cat is not cat. That is contradictory statement. That is again not adding any meaningful knowledge in our discourse. So Wittgenstein says that there is a realm of the reality that we can capture, that we can establish in terms of fact, and that falls within the space and time. And the discourse in religion are the pure metaphysics, for which we cannot have any fact within the space and time. That's what he calls meaningless statements. So that's where we see the role, the importance of Wittgenstein, the way he changed the trends in philosophy, and we see that the great change in terms of the philosophers now questions the metaphysics, and they use the logic and science in the discourse of philosophy, and that actually led the great development in philosophy of science. So after that discussion, we talk about the A.J. Ayer, so who propounded logical positivism, and that's where we find the use of logic, empiricism, and theory of verification. Of course, A.J. Ayer, a great philosopher, he talks about that in order to be the knowledge of anything, it has to be a fact, and fact has to be true or false. Either it can be true or it can be false. If something which can neither be true nor false cannot be a fact and cannot be a right subject of knowledge. So he differentiates between the science and pseudoscience. Science, of course, depends on the facts which we can prove or disapprove in terms of truth or falsity, and pseudoscience, like metaphysics, is such that we cannot prove or disapprove in terms of the objective facts. That's what we do in the scientific discourses. So these English philosophers actually visited Vienna Circle in 1932 and 33, and Vienna Circle made a great change in philosophy when they involved with the logic, mathematics, and the science. They changed the whole discourse in philosophy. They changed the whole trends in philosophy, and then A.J. Ayer came with the theory of verification, according to which anything it has to be proved or disapproved has to have based on experience. If not direct experience, it has an indirect input where it can be proved through experience. Okay, so directly, for example, if we say it's raining outside, we can go and through the sense and experiences we can actually confirm whether it's raining or not. Or indirect experiences, let's say the scientific fact which we cannot directly experience, or the historical facts which cannot be directly experienced. But of course, we have the enough evidences through the scientific methods or the other methods by which they can be proved and disapproved in terms of facts. So in his great book, Language, Truth and Logic, he talks about the role of language and logic in the development of philosophy. So now, before we summarize about the whole discussion, let's try to understand the three major aspects that we have discussed in this lecture. So of course, we start with the first philosophy, right, and then we also talk about science, and then we also discuss about the logic. Of course, in when we talk about the knowledge, right, talk about knowledge, creation, and we talk about, you know, research and development. Yes. Now, let's try to understand, in the whole discussion, we try to understand when you say philosophy as a mother of science, it is precisely because even when we talk about the PhD, Doctor of Philosophy in Philosophy, we try to understand the fundamental principles of reality and knowledge, and that is precisely through the understanding of the philosophy of that subject. It may be philosophy of science, philosophy of mathematics, philosophy of history, philosophy of psychology, and any discipline we talked in the research, we talk about the philosophy and philosophy, right? So philosophy, what it does, it tries to explain the fundamental principle of reality through a critical discourse. Sometimes it adapts to certain methods to explain the reality, to explain what actually exists and how we know that thing. And when something is not knowledge, it is a form of an illusion. So of course, in philosophy, we discussed about the two major trends, right? We talk about the rationalism school and we talk about the empiricism school, right? So in both schools, what we try to discuss about how knowledge is constituted, what are the fundamental principles of knowledge, how is knowledge possible, whether it is possible through mind or it's through sense experience, or both we require. So we have to understand philosophy gives the directions to knowledge. It gives fundamental principles of knowledge for any discourse. So we see in the history of philosophy from the ancient to medieval to modern ages, we see the change in philosophical methods and philosophical trend, and they have made an impact on research and developments. They shape the views of that time, right? And they shape not only views in research and development, they shape the ideologies of those cultures and nations, and they shape the historical movements in the history. So of course, philosophy has a great role in the research and development in making us understand about the principles of knowledge, fundamentals of the realities, and the methods of knowledge, and where logic has a really great role in philosophy as a branch of philosophy. Logic actually explains what is right knowledge, and it is of course through the argumentation, and then it talks about the validity and invalidity, right, in the discourse. So logic also plays an important role in giving us a clear picture of the right arguments, and it also talks about the fallacies that we commit in writing. So logic has a great role in our research writing, so to understand which is the right argument and which is the valid argument and which is invalid argument. And then we have a comparison between the science and philosophy. We saw after the rise of Vienna Circle, when the philosophers criticized the metaphysics in their rejection of metaphysics, they talked about the facts, and when he talks about the facts, they precisely maintain the point that the fact is fact that can be either truth or can be false, and that is to our sense and experiences. And then we have to understand how these two go together in bringing the developments in philosophy of science, where philosophy becomes a critical method to critically evaluate the principle of science, whether scientific principles are logically correct or not, and then we see the entanglement of these three different discourses, what we call philosophy, science and logic, and we realize that there is a definite role of philosophy and philosophy of science and logic in our research developments. So for the research developments, there is a great role of philosophy, logic and science. Undoubtedly, without studying philosophy and having a general understanding of logic and philosophy of science, we cannot develop a good research, and that's where there is much importance of these three discourses. Now we further move to the summary of the discussion that we had today. So now let's talk about the what we had in today's discussion. So interestingly, we talked about philosophy. We also understood the nature of philosophy, and then we move in the end to the philosophy of science. So we tried to understand about the philosophy in this whole lecture and its role in research, the way philosophy has shaped different views in research development, and the philosophy how it shapes the knowledge and the ways we understand the knowledge. And then we talked about the branches of philosophy, in which I explained about the logic, metaphysics, epistemology and axiology. So in that discussion on philosophy, we talked about the Plato, we talked about Aristotle, and of course we talked about the theory of knowledge, how knowledge is possible, and how knowledge is to justified belief. And then we talked about two major schools, rationalism and empiricism, in the way rationalist scholar maintains that certain knowledge is possible only through mind, because sensory experiences cannot provide certainty as they are misleading. And this school was led by modern philosophers, Descartes, who gave an interesting method to philosophy, what he calls method of doubt. And then we also analyzed the other school, namely empiricism, in which we talked about the discussions based on David Hume's philosophy, in which David Hume casted doubt on the possibility of knowledge, and he says that the causality is not possible the way it has been defined by the philosophers, and he discards all kinds of substances, and he discards the science, religion, metaphysics, and all kinds of knowledge which is defined by the early scholars or the philosophers, and he turns to be a universal skeptic on this point. And then we also try to understand the importance of Immanuel Kant in the discourse on knowledge, where he reconciles these two diametrically opposite views of rationalism, empiricism. And then we move to the discussion of Hegel, and interestingly Hegel talks about the synthetic knowledge, and he talks about the knowledge as emerging phenomena through the thesis and antithesis. And then we talk about the more discussion we had on the G. Moore and the way he develops the common sense philosophy, and then we talk about the Bertrand Russell, the way he talks about the philosophy, and he talks about the metaphysics and the role of scientific facts. And then we move to the discussion on Wittgenstein, the way he defines the philosophy as an activity, and he shaped the role of philosophy very differently, and what he calls a therapeutic role he assigns to philosophy. And he talks about the role of logic, and he talks about that science has to generate facts where philosophy cannot, and philosophy has a role to check those facts, whether those principles of science are logically correct or well defined, well structured or not. And then we move to the discussion on nature of philosophy. So we try to understand the nature of philosophy, the way it has been evolved from ancient to medieval to modern times. Of course, in that discussion, we try to understand the important philosophers who shaped critical thinking in knowledge and research. And then we discussed about Plato, Aristotle, Descartes, David Hume, Immanuel Kant, and Hegel. And then we critically comprehended the role of rationality and sense experience in shaping the knowledge, and we also try to understand what is certainty in knowledge and what is probability in the knowledge in the discussion on David Hume. And then in the end, we talked about philosophy of science. So in the end, discussing about the philosophy of science, we have to understand how it has evolved in the history of philosophy, when we see the trends developed by the Vienna Circle, when it was developed in 1923 in UK, we find that the role of logicians, mathematicians, and the scientists, how they actually impacted the philosophy, and they gave importance to the science, the way science establishes the objective facts, and they had the unanimity in establishing the fact. So they talked about the theory of verification, that any fact, if it has to come from the knowledge, has to be the true or false, and then philosophy, the metaphysics, what we discussed, what has been discussed in the history of philosophy, finds no space in that discussion, because that doesn't fall in the realm of these objective facts, and that's where Wittgenstein also talks about the meaningless propositions or the senseless propositions. So we have to understand the way philosophy of science evolved, and there's a great role of Vienna Circle and the great role of the scientific discoveries and inventions, and the historical movements took place in the history, and then we critically analyzed how philosophy has undergone a change after the rise of Vienna Circle. We talked about the philosophers such as Moore, Russell, Wittgenstein, and A.J. Ayer. We understood how logic, language, and science and sense experience led to the development in philosophy of science. These are the references that I have used to develop this lecture. So I acknowledge the Google image, all the image-based contents other than original diagrams made by the author to prepare this lecture have been downloaded from Google Images. Author acknowledged the Google support in that and expressed gratitude for the same, and declared no copyright for the download materials. I have given proper sources on each slide where I have downloaded the images. So thank you.